The Gulfstream's cabin lights were dimmed to that amber glow I'd specifically requested from the interior designer, and I was sitting in the cream leather lounger near the galley, holding a crystal tumbler of Hibiki 21 that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My father was 3 feet away, red-faced, jabbing his finger at the polished walnut console between us. He had just demanded I sign over 20% of my company to cover what he called your brother's bridge financing. His suitcase, my mother's matching one, and my brother's duffel were stacked by the forward bulkhead like they belonged there. Like they'd been invited. They had not been invited. I took a slow sip of the whiskey and watched my father's mouth move. 3 years. 3 years of birthday cards returned to sender. 3 years of my mother blocking my number after I told her I wasn't going to co-sign a single thing for my brother ever again. 3 years of being treated like I had died in a car accident they were all quietly relieved about. And now here they were, standing in the cabin of an aircraft I owned outright, demanding cash like the past 36 months had never happened. My name is Whitney Aldermere. I was 31 years old that afternoon in late September, and I had spent the previous 4 years building a logistics firm out of a converted warehouse in Charleston, South Carolina, that I now operated across 9 states. The Gulfstream was not a vanity purchase, although I'll admit it felt like one when I signed the papers. It was a depreciable asset on my balance sheet, and the hours I flew between client sites in Atlanta, Dallas, Nashville, and Miami had genuinely made it pencil out. But more than that, it was a symbol. It was the thing that told every smug investment banker who had ever passed on me that I had built something real without their money and without my family's permission. And it was the thing, apparently, that had brought my family back from the dead. Let me back up. 3 years before that afternoon, I had been sitting in my mother's kitchen in Greenville, South Carolina, watching her slide a piece of paper across the breakfast table at me. The paper was a personal guarantee for $140,000 in business loans my brother Colton had taken out to open what he called a boutique fitness concept. In downtown Charleston, he had taken out 2 before. Both had failed. The first one had cost my parents a home equity line I later learned they were still paying off. The second one had cost me $11,000 I had loaned him out of my own savings during my second year out of college, money I never saw again and was told it was rude to ask about. I was 28 years old that morning in my mother's kitchen. I had just gotten my first business line of credit for my logistics company, secured against my own personal credit, and I told my mother very simply, "No, I won't sign this. He needs to work for someone else for a few years. He needs to learn how a business runs before he runs his own." My mother's face went through 3 stages. First, she looked surprised. Then, she looked hurt. Then, she looked like a woman I had never met before. She said, "If you can't help your own brother, you are not my daughter." I want to be clear about something. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up my purse, I walked out to my Civic, and I drove the 4 hours back to Charleston in complete silence. I waited for her to call. She didn't. I called her 2 weeks later. She let it go to voicemail. I sent flowers on her birthday. They were returned to the florist. By Christmas of that year, my own father, the man who had taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 9 years old, was sending my text to spam. So I built. There's something specific that happens when you understand that the people who are supposed to love you have decided you don't exist. You either fall apart or you build. I built. I worked 70-hour weeks. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a barbecue joint on King Street, and the place smelled like brisket smoke every Saturday morning, and I loved it. I won a contract with a regional grocery chain. I won a bigger one with a pharmaceutical distributor. I hired 2 operations managers, then 4, then 9. My Aunt Marjorie, my mother's older sister, who had not spoken to my mother since 1998 over a different matter, became the only family I had left. She drove down from Asheville once a month and sat at my dining room table and asked me hard questions about cash flow and customer concentration risk. And she did not once mention my parents or my brother. By the spring of last year, I had 84 employees and a fleet of regional trucks and the Gulfstream G280 I had financed through a structured lease with a Delaware-based holding company I owned, which my CPA had set up for liability and tax reasons that I will not bore you with. I was 31. I had been radio silent from my parents for 3 full years. I assumed it would stay that way forever, and I had made peace with that mostly. Then my brother posted a photograph of himself standing next to my plane. I didn't see it for 2 days because I don't follow him on anything. My operations manager saw it. She is 26 and she is on every platform, and she walked into my office on a Tuesday morning and said, "Whitney, I think you need to look at something." She turned her phone around. There was Colton, in a polo shirt, his hand resting on the fuselage of the G280 right next to the registration number, with a caption that read something like, "Family business is booming. Proud to be part of the team." He had 814 likes. I felt three things in quick succession. First, a hot wash of anger. Second, a colder thing that I want to call calculation, but which was probably closer to grief. Third, and this is the one that surprised me, a strange and quiet curiosity. Because there was no way my brother had been on that plane. The plane had been parked at the FBO in Charleston for the previous 6 days. He had clearly driven down, found my hangar, talked his way past someone, and posed for a picture. He had used my asset as a prop in his own life, and he had done it knowing that I would see it eventually, and that there would be nothing I could do about it. Except there was something I could do about it. Several things, in fact. I called my aunt. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said one of the most important sentences anyone has ever said to me. She said, "Whitney, they're going to come for you now. They will frame it as reconciliation. It will not be reconciliation. It will not be reconciliation. Get your house in order before they arrive." I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why didn't I just block them at the gate? Why didn't I call airport security the second I saw that photograph? Why didn't I have my attorney send a cease and desist? And those are all fair questions. The honest answer is that calling security would have been the easy thing, and the easy thing would have ended with my parents going home and telling everyone at their church that I was a cruel and ungrateful daughter, who wouldn't even let her own family see her airplane. The easy thing would have given them the narrative. I didn't want the narrative. I wanted the receipts, so I let them come. I had my aunt fly down. I had a long conversation with my attorney, a woman named Beatrix Quinlan, who was one of the smartest people I have ever met. And I had a second conversation with my forensic accountant, a man who had previously helped me clean up a mess left by a vendor who tried to invoice me twice for the same shipment. I had a third conversation with the captain of the Gulfstream, a former Air Force pilot named Captain Lonergan, and I asked him a very specific question about federal regulations regarding unauthorized passengers on a privately operated aircraft. He told me what I needed to know. I had a fourth conversation with the FBO manager, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Pellegrini, and I requested that all visitor logs and security footage from the previous 2 weeks be preserved and copied to a thumb drive I would pick up personally. Then I waited. It took 11 days. My mother called me on a Thursday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. She called again Friday morning. I let that one go too. She called a third time Friday afternoon, and I picked up, and her voice was the voice I remembered from when I was a little girl and I had a fever, and she would sit at the edge of my bed and read to me from a yellow-spined paperback she kept in her nightstand. It was the warm voice, the Sunday voice. The voice she used when she wanted something. "Whitney, sweetheart, your father and I have been talking. We've missed you so much. We were wrong. We want to come visit. We want to see you. We want to say you. We want to start over." I closed my eyes for a moment in my office. I'm not going to lie to you. There is a part of me, even now, that wanted to believe her. There is a part of every estranged daughter that wants the warm voice to be real. I let myself feel it for about 4 seconds. Then I opened my eyes and I said, "That sounds wonderful, Mom. When were you thinking?" She said, "Well, we were hoping next Saturday. Your father has been wanting to see Charleston again, and Colton was thinking we could all go somewhere together. A little family trip. Something to mark a fresh start." There it was. Colton was thinking. Colton, who hadn't existed in my life for 3 years either, was now part of the fresh start. I almost laughed. I said, "That sounds lovely. Why don't you all come Saturday morning? I'll meet you at the airport." She paused. "The airport?" "Yes, Mom. The airport." "Yes, Mom. The airport." "Yes, Mom. The airport." I hung up and I called my aunt. I called Beatrix. I called Captain Lonergan and I told him to file a flight plan for the following Saturday. Destination optional. Fuel for 4 hours. 2 crew on board. I called Mr. Pellegrini and asked him to please have the cabin stocked exactly as I usually requested, including the Hibiki 21. and to make sure the cabin recording system, which is a standard feature on the G2080 and which I had legally disclosed in writing to every previous passenger, was operational. I called my forensic accountant and I asked him one more question, and he sent me a memo that evening with a single sentence in bold. Yes, this is structurable. Recommend documenting intent contemporaneously. I did not sleep well that week. I want to be honest about that. I was not the calm and ruthless woman you might be imagining. I was a daughter who was about to do something I knew I could not undo, and even though I knew it was the right thing, I cried twice that week, once in my aunt's hotel room on Thursday night, and once in my car in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter on Friday morning when a Patsy Cline song came on the radio that my mother used to hum while she folded laundry. I am not a stone. I want you to know that. The women who do these things are not stones. We are just women who have been pushed past a particular line. Saturday morning was clear and bright. I drove to the FBO at 8:30. I was wearing a navy linen blazer over a white t-shirt and dark jeans, and I had put my hair up in a low bun, and I looked, I think, like a woman who could be persuaded. That was the look I wanted. My parents and my brother pulled into the parking lot at 9:15 in my father's silver Lexus. My mother got out first. She had lost weight. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders narrower, and there was a moment when I saw him from across the tarmac and I almost cried again, because he was still my dad. And the thing about your dad is that you don't actually stop loving him just because he stopped loving him, just because he stopped loving you. My brother got out of the backseat and he was wearing aviator sunglasses and a shirt I happened to note cost $350 because I had seen it in a store window in Charleston and thought it was overpriced. He did not look at me. He looked at the plane. My mother hugged me. She held on a beat too long. She whispered, "We've missed you so much." My father shook my hand, then thought better of it, and pulled me into a stiff one-armed hug. My brother said, "Hey, sis," like no time had passed at all. I led them across the tarmac. My mother kept saying how beautiful it all was. My father asked me what the operating costs were, and I told him a number that was slightly higher than the real number, just to see what he would do. He whistled. Colton said, "Damn, Whit, this is unreal. I'm so proud of you." I had not been called Whit since I was 14 years old. We boarded. Captain Lonergan greeted them politely. The cabin was set up exactly the way I had asked. 4 leather loungers around the polished walnut console, the amber lighting, a tray of small pastries from a bakery on King Street, the hibiki on the side table, and a single sheet of paper, face down, that I had placed there myself that morning. My mother sat across from me, my father sat next to her, my brother took the lounger by the window and immediately pulled out his phone. I let Captain Lonergan close the cabin door. I want to be clear about what happened next, because the comments people leave on these kinds of stories often miss the point. We did not take off. The aircraft remained on the ground at the Charleston FBO. The door was closed because I wanted the conversation to be private, and because federal regulations are very specific about who can and cannot be a passenger on a privately operated aircraft, and the moment the door closed with them inside, certain documentation requirements activated. I had already disclosed to them, verbally and in a signed visitor waiver, they had each initialed on the way up the air stair, that the cabin was equipped with audio and video recording for safety and insurance purposes. My brother had signed his without reading it. My father had glanced at it. My mother had said, "Oh, of course, honey, whatever you need." I poured my mother a sparkling water. I poured my father a finger of the hibiki. I poured myself one too. I did not pour one for my brother, who didn't notice. I said, "I'm so glad you came. I want to talk about what's been going on. I want to hear from each of you." My mother started. She talked for almost 10 minutes. She talked about how she had been wrong, how she had let her fear for Colton's future poison her relationship with me, how she had prayed about it, how she had wept about it, how she had finally come to understand that I had done the right thing 3 years ago by saying no, and that she should never have asked me to sign that guarantee. I watched her face. She was almost crying. She might have actually been crying. I think she believed every word she said in that moment. That is the specific twisted math of certain mothers. They can believe a thing completely and still be using it as a setup. Because then my father cleared his throat. He said, "Whitney, your mother is right. We were wrong, and we want to make it right. We want to start fresh, which is why we wanted to talk to you about Colton's new venture." I did not change my expression. I said, "Tell me about it." Colton looked up from his phone. He launched into a pitch. It was a wellness brand. It was an app. It was a subscription model. It was going to revolutionize, and I quote, the integration of mindfulness and high net worth lifestyle. He had a deck. He had a deck on his phone which he turned toward me, and the deck contained a slide that listed my company by name as a strategic partner. It listed me as a founding advisor. Neither of those things had ever been discussed with me. He needed, he said, a bridge of $320,000. He could not get it from a bank because of his credit history. He needed it from family. He needed it from me. And, he added, because he had clearly been coached, the cleanest way to do it would be for me to take an equity stake in his company, which would, in his words, save everyone $40,000 in taxes. My father leaned forward. Whitney, your brother is your blood. Your mother and I are getting older. We need to know our children are taken care of. And since you are the only one of us sitting on resources you frankly do not need, you are going to help him. Today, before this plane takes off. There it was, before this plane takes off. As if the aircraft were a bus that was about to leave the station. As if any of us were going anywhere. As if my father had any standing whatsoever to set conditions on me inside an aircraft I owned and on which I was technically pilot in command's primary passenger. I almost smiled. Instead, I let my eyes fill. I let my voice go small. I said, Dad, I don't know. I have employees. I have payroll. I can't just. My mother pounced. She had been waiting for the crack. She slid down the cabin and put her arms around me and said all the things mothers say in those moments. That I was a good girl. That I was a generous girl. That blood was thicker than balance sheets. That Grandma Aldermere would have wanted this. That Grandma Aldermere, who had left me $42,000 in a college fund that my parents had quietly drained when I was 19 to pay for Colton's first business, would have wanted this. I want you to understand how cold I went when she said that name. I want you to understand that there is a kind of anger that does not feel like anger at all, that feels like the inside of a refrigerator, that feels like a clear, cold room with very good lighting. I took a long sip of the hibiki. I said, okay, let me think. I picked up the sheet of paper that had been sitting face down on the console. I turned it over. I read it slowly as if I were seeing it for the first time. It was a one-page term sheet that my attorney Beatrix had drafted the previous Wednesday. It was titled Memorandum of Understanding Regarding Family Indebtedness. It did not, on its face, look like much. It was written in plain English, which is unusual for a document drafted by Beatrix, who has been known to use the word heretofore in a grocery list. I had asked her specifically to make it look casual. It looked casual. I said, Mom, Dad, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. I can't just write Colton the check. My CPA would have a heart attack. But there's a way to structure it that works for everyone. I can buy the debt. I can purchase Colton's existing obligations from his current creditors at a discount, then carry them on my books as a related party loan. It saves us all in taxes. It's clean. You sign this. I wire the funds Monday morning, and we move forward. My father reached for the paper. He read it. He read it the way he reads everything, which is to say he scanned for numbers and ignored the language around them. He said, this says debt purchase, so you're buying out his creditors. And then he owes you instead of them. Right, I said. It's the same as if I gave him the money, just structured differently for tax purposes. It was not the same. It was not the same at all. What that document did, in language my father did not bother to read, was three things. First, it acknowledged in writing that my brother and my parents had jointly and severally agreed that my parents would be co-signatories and guarantors on the debt I was purchasing. Second, it acknowledged that the funds my parents had previously withdrawn from my college fund, totaling $42,000 from a custodial account established by my late grandmother, constituted a previously undocumented debt owed by them to me, and that this debt was now being formally recognized and incorporated into the present instrument. Third, it acknowledged that all parties present had read and understood the document and were signing of their own free will without duress, in the presence of recording equipment, the existence of which had been previously disclosed. My father signed it. He signed it without reading the back of the page, where the second and third clauses lived. My mother signed it after him. Colton signed it last, with a flourish, like he was autographing a baseball, I poured each of them another finger of the hibiki. I touched my glass to theirs. I said, "To family." They drank. I stood up. I walked to the forward bulkhead. I opened the small storage panel where Captain Lonergan kept the visitor manifest. I took out a sealed envelope. I walked back to my seat. I sat down. I said, "Dad, Mom, Colton, before we go any further, there's something I need you to see." I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of the document they had just signed. Stapled to the back was a forensic accounting summary of the $42,000 withdrawn from my college fund between June 2013 and March 2014. Stapled to that was a sworn affidavit from the branch manager of the bank that had held the custodial account, confirming the withdrawals and confirming that they had been made by my father and mother as custodians. Stapled to that was a memo from Beatrix Quinlan, attorney at law, on her firm's letterhead, explaining in 2 paragraphs of plain English what the document they had just signed actually said. My father read it. The color left his face in stages, starting at his hairline and working down to his jaw, the same way the sun leaves a wall in the late afternoon. My mother said, "Whitney, honey, what is this?" I said, "This is the part where I tell you that the conversation we just had was recorded with your written consent in compliance with South Carolina law. This is the part where I tell you that the document Dad just signed acknowledges a $42,000 debt that you both owe me personally, plus 13 years of accrued interest at the federal applicable rate, which my accountant has calculated to be approximately $26,000 on top of the principal. This is the part where I tell you that Colton's $320,000 in existing obligations are now mine. But the structure of the document means that you, Dad, and you, Mom, are jointly and severally liable as guarantors. And this is the part where I tell you that I am, effective Monday morning, your creditor." I let that word hang in the cabin. Creditor. My brother said, "Whit, hold on, this isn't." I held up my hand. I said, "I am going to give you a choice. You can repudiate the document right now, in front of Captain Lonergan, who will witness, and we will all go home, and you will never contact me again. Or you can honor the document, in which case I will set up a payment plan that does not require you to sell anything immediately, and we will manage this like adults. But you should know that if you choose option 1, I will file a civil suit for the $42,000 plus interest the same afternoon. The bank records exist. The affidavit exists. There is no statute of limitations on civil fraud involving a custodial account where the beneficiary did not learn of the breach until adulthood, and you can ask your own attorney about that." I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at my brother, who had taken off his aviator sunglasses for the first time all morning, and who was, I noticed, sweating through his $350 shirt. My father said, very quietly, "Whitney, you wouldn't do this to your own family." I said, "Dad, I don't have a family. You made that clear 3 years ago. What I have is a balance sheet. You are now on it." I stood up. I walked to the cabin door. I opened it. Captain Lonergan was waiting at the bottom of the air stair. The morning sun was coming in through the open door at an angle that made the cabin look almost holy. I said, "Captain Lonergan will help you with your luggage. Please don't come back to this airport without an attorney." They left. They left their luggage. They left their hibiki. They left, eventually, the silver Lexus too, because by the time my brother's debts were fully restructured under my ownership and the payment plan was finalized, the Lexus had been sold to cover the first installment, and the house in Greenville had a lien on it. And my mother had taken a part-time job at a fabric store, and my father had stopped going to the church where he had told everyone for 3 years that his daughter was a cold and ungrateful woman who would not help her family. My brother declared personal bankruptcy 4 months later. The wage garnishment from the restructured debt followed him into his next job, which was selling timeshares in Myrtle Beach. He calls me sometimes. I don't pick up. The $42,000 and the accrued interest came back to me in monthly installments from my parents that I do not touch. I put it into a custodial account at the same bank that had held my grandmother's original fund. The beneficiary is a young woman I sponsor through a scholarship program at the College of Charleston. Her name is not important here. What matters is that the money is doing what my grandmother intended it to do, which was to make a young woman free. My Aunt Marjorie still drives down once a month. We still sit at my dining room table. She still asks me hard questions about cash flow and customer concentration risk. She has never once asked me if I regret what I did on the plane that morning. I think she knows the answer. I want to say one last thing. For any of you watching this who have a family that has decided you don't exist, blood is not a contract. Loyalty is. The people who erased you do not get to come back when the asset is shiny enough. They come back because the asset is shiny. They will frame it as reconciliation. It will not be reconciliation. It will be a balance sheet, and you should make sure you are the one holding the pen. I keep the hibiki on a shelf in my office now. I do not drink it often. But every now and then, when a new vendor tries something cute on an invoice, or a competitor tries to poach one of my managers, or a man at a conference assumes I am someone's assistant, I pour myself a small one. I think about that Saturday morning. I think about the amber light. I think about my father's face when he saw the word creditor. And I get back to work. I've thought a lot in the months since that Saturday morning at the Charleston FBO about why my parents really came back. And I don't think it was greed alone. Greed is too clean a word. I think it was something messier, something closer to the way certain people genuinely cannot see another person as a separate human being. To my mother and my father, I was never a daughter. I was a function, and when the function I served changed, when I went from obedient child who will absorb the cost of her brother's mistakes to successful woman who has chosen herself, they didn't know how to update their understanding of me. So they erased me, and then, when the asset got shiny enough, they tried to overwrite the erasure with a story about reconciliation. The story would have worked too if I hadn't spent 3 years quietly becoming someone who could see it for what it was. Here is what I keep coming back to. Every choice I made in those 3 years was a small one. Wake up early. Read the contracts myself. Pay my aunt back the $400 she lent me when my second client paid late. Tell Beatrix the whole truth about my finances, even when it was embarrassing. Save the screenshot of Colton standing next to my plane instead of throwing my phone across the room. None of those were dramatic. None of them felt, in the moment, like anything. But character is not built in dramatic moments. Character is what shows up in the dramatic moments after years of small ones have stacked up underneath it. When my father slid that paper across the cabin and said, "Before this plane takes off," I did not become someone new in that instant. I just was who I had already become. I want you to understand that the integrity to refuse a guarantee at 28, the patience to wait 11 days for them to call, and the courage to open that envelope on the plane, those were not 3 different virtues. They were the same virtue at 3 different ages. The girl who said no in her mother's kitchen and the woman who said creditor on the Gulf Stream are the same person. The bridge between them is just work. Honest, boring, daily work. If there's something I'd want my younger self to know, or my grandmother's scholarship recipient to know someday, it's this. The people who treat you as a function will always come back when the function gets profitable. You cannot reason them out of seeing you that way. You cannot love them out of it. You can only build a life so solid, so well documented, so legally airtight, that when they finally arrive with their luggage and their warm voices, you have the receipts to meet them with. And then you have to be the kind of person who is willing to use those receipts. That last part is the hardest. It is also the one no one else can do for you. I do not regret that morning. I think about my mother sometimes. I do not call.